Any kind of flight is a good flight as long as you don't break a bunch of major parts. Yesterday's flight might not have seemed very productive, but to me it was. It always generates telemetry data to play with. So I noticed something in the ground station view of the flight. My airspeed and ground speed were off by 10, 15 miles an hour. Yet I didn't really detect any wind at the field. Therefore, in my humble opinion, they should have been almost the same, but they weren't. So we'll go in here and look at airspeed. There it is. And I'm going to try to do this slowly. I don't plan out my videos. Maybe if I did, they would be better. Sorry, guys. I've asked you several times, do you want them planned out with bells and whistles, or do you want them off the cuff? I'm basically just doing them off the cuff. Here's the fly-by-wire A mode for takeoff. And then you can see the airspeed comes up rather quickly when I throw it. And then I get it in the air and up and turn back away from the power lines again at that field. Then I just did a return to launch, and here's where return to launch was invoked. I let it do its thing. Now this is the airspeed from the airspeed sensor. Until here, when I put it back in fly-by-wire A mode and started dropping her down to have that hard landing. So if we take from the GPS 1, its speed, well, we'll look at the altitude real quick. Here's what we were talking about. Here's the altitude in green. And from takeoff, boy, I just shot up to like 200 and something feet, if I remember from watching the ground station recording. And then when it was put in return to launch, that came back down and pretty much settled out at 120 feet like it was supposed to until the landing here. I would just get rid of that. Now this is the airspeed is calculated by the GPS. And these are the two senses that I saw in the ground station recording that I just didn't like it. And this graph shows it just as much as I saw it in the numbers over time. The airspeed never came up to or above ground speed. In my humble opinion, it should. The airspeed being the one in red and the ground speed being green from the GPS calculated speed, which I trust is pretty much right. If there was a 10 mile per hour wind, I honestly think in the downwind phase of the flight, unless the platform is going to try to keep the airspeed down to keep the ground speed the same, the airspeed should exceed the ground speed. No, it should never exceed the ground speed. Yeah. When it's flying against the wind, the airspeed should exceed the ground speed, in my humble opinion. If there were a 10 mile an hour wind and the platform were flying at an airspeed of 30 miles an hour, then the ground speed should be 20 miles an hour into the wind, in my humble opinion. And downwind, the ground speed should be 10 miles an hour above the airspeed because of the wind speed itself. Therefore, 30 mile an hour airspeed going downwind on a 10 mile an hour wind speed should have a ground speed of 40 miles per hour. This never caught up. Now, what I witnessed at the field does represent this graph in the fact that there was no wind. So there was really no wind speed in this calculation on this graph. But if, in fact, while going downwind, the platform tried to adjust the airspeed to keep the same ground speed, I could see how, that it wouldn't exceed it. But again, on the upwind side, I just couldn't see why they would really rev up the motor on that side of the circle to increase the ground speed. Anyway, you can see where my confusion comes from. I don't know if they're trying to compensate, if they're trying to control the ground speed and keep it fixed. I don't see why they would ever worry about the airspeed as far as changing the throttle, because that could get into trouble. But again, I don't know any of this. Let's go back into the graph and I'll show you what I think I discovered. So if we turn on messages here, you can basically see that there was a airspeed 0 ratio reset right here to 3.8. Right here's another one. It's kind of hidden by these messages right here, and I'm not sure how to. You can pull the mode out of that stuff, but I'm not sure how to pull those system messages out of there. The chip BIOS, the Arduino plain version, and there's another one here. But it sort of looks to me like there's only two, based on what I can see of the characters in these messages, that this hiding behind here is a reset of the airspeed ratio, and here is a reset of the airspeed ratio. And it looks to me like from takeoff, oops, here's 1 minute, 2 minutes. It sort of looks to me like the first message right in here, if that comes up from the center of the message, it would be about 2 minutes in. Here's where the flight starts. This would be sort of 1 minute. This would be sort of 2 minutes, and that's when that one airspeed is reset to 2.7. I seem to remember it was at 1.9 in the parameters list when I set it up for this airspeed calibration the night before. So I think it came up from 1.9 to 2.7 right here. And see, that made the airspeed right here for this time period. That's not 2 minutes later. If there's one right here, that's a minute later. Okay. The documentation kind of alludes to every 2 minutes the airspeed ratio is reset. Looks to me like it was less than that. And I see only two of them, this 2.7 and this 3.8. 2.7 was added in right here, and that brought the airspeed up for this time period above what it was here, closer to the ground speed. I cannot tell you why this is so different on the ground speed here, and then it settled in, but it seems to have. Then on the second airspeed ratio, which I kind of think is coming up right here from this message, because it's seen right here, that bumped it up from 2.7. There's some other decimals on the end of that I'm not reading, to 3.8. And then there was not any other airspeed ratios reset for the rest of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5, 6 minutes or so after this. So maybe it just does two. I don't know. Maybe it thinks it was finished. I don't know that either. So in my humble opinion, only two ratio resets were done, and it never raised the airspeed ratio high enough to begin matching the airspeed or ground speed of the GPS. And I really think it needs to, based on yesterday's virtually zero wind, no wind at all. So I think these should come up closer to each other. Therefore, I'm going to state that the airspeed calibration of the Mini Talon is not yet complete. I see that they're running by these graphs and stuff. I can see that they're running much the same with the peaks fairly much matching the two speeds everywhere. And see the peaks pretty much line up. All these peaks with these peaks and valleys with these valleys. I just think it really needs to have some more calibration time done and see if these won't converge a little more in no wind conditions. Now, doing these calibrations when there is a 5 or 10 mile an hour wind is going to be more difficult than no wind, but who knows? That may be what it needs to kind of see the difference in airspeed on each side of the return to launch circle when it's doing this calibration. I don't know, but I do suspect fully from this data that my airspeed calibration is not finished with the Mini Talon. What else do we have for airspeed? It's the differential pressure. That's coming in blue. Now maybe I have the tubes switched on the airspeed sensor. I don't know. Raw pressure. Raw pressure still shows higher than the red graph. Still, the peaks and valleys are matching. I don't think these values are being recorded. Okay, so that's a little fun with telemetry logs and some of the things that telemetry logs can do for you. So because of this telemetry log, I will say airspeed calibration is not completed for the Mini Talon. All right, guys, have a good one. All right, thank you so much.